Good morning and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I can see we have a lot of guests from all over today, and we're happy to see you once again. My name is Karen Skiles, and I'm pleased to be your hostess for today's webinar. We've been delivering our monthly webcations to you since 2007, and we're very happy to see so many returning guests back with us today. At ITSM Academy, we believe that one of our important roles in the industry is to help organizations get buy-in for their IT service management programs. To assist you in your efforts, we are offering this webinar and many of our previous webinars to your organization in a virtual environment at no charge for a group of 4 or more participants. There's no selling involved with it. It's just our way of reaching out to the community to help organizations with their IT service management programs. So if you're interested in having us deliver this webinar for you, please just email us at info@itsmacademy.com. Today we're pleased to have our own Donna Knapp with us. Donna's presentation is titled Process Maturity. It's not about the numbers. During the presentation, the information that Donna presents may raise some questions, or you may be looking for some additional clarification or information. We've scheduled Donna's time at the end of today's session to answer your questions. To submit questions, just use the chat window that appears in the GoToMeeting box, which is located in the upper right corner of your screen. Open your chat window by clicking on the plus sign next to the word chat, and just type your question in the chat log section and click the send button. Feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation. We have a large number of attendees for the session, and Donna has a lot to cover. So we'll answer as many questions as possible today, and if we're not able to respond to each of you today, we will include all of today's question and answers in our compilation of the Q&A report and send you a link by email to download in just a few days. For those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of ITSM education. We've trained tens of thousands of students on-site across the Americas and in our public training centers in Fort Lauderdale, Dallas, Minneapolis, Phoenix, Reston, Salt Lake City, and Tampa, as well as in our virtual classrooms. Now let's introduce today's speaker, Donna Knapp. Donna has over 25 years of experience in the IT industry working as a practitioner, consultant, and trainer. She is currently working with ITSM Academy as Curriculum Development Manager, developing course materials and training programs. Donna is an ITIL expert, an ITIL service manager, a certified process design engineer. She holds all of the ITIL lifecycle and capability certifications, as well as multiple ITIL practitioner certifications. Donna is also certified in ISO 20000 and Microsoft Operations Framework. She's developed a number of highly successful seminars, including From Help Desk to Service Desk, using ITIL best practices, and Achieving High Customer Satisfaction, Customer Service Skills for Service Desk Professionals. Donna is also the author of 2 college textbooks, A Guide to Service Desk Contests in the third edition, and A Guide to Customer Service Skills for Service Desk Professionals, also 3rd edition. Donna most recently authored the ITSM Process Design Guide titled Developing, Reengineering, and Improving IT Service Management. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. We're very much looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you. I'm ready to go. All right. So I want to just spend 1 second talking about the agenda, and part of what I want to do is talk about the genesis for the information that I'm going to share with you today. So we're going to talk about why process maturity is important. We're going to talk briefly about assessing process maturity, although that's not the genesis of this presentation. We're going to talk, and primarily we're going to focus on factors that influence maturity, and we're going to talk about lessons learned. One of the things I've seen is that there are different approaches to assessing process maturity, and some are very high level. A lot of you out there are probably familiar with approaches like CMMI, where you've got like 0 through 5. There's a number of different approaches, and they are either really high level or there's very, very detailed looks at maturity. And one of the things I set out to do is look at more importantly, what are the characteristics of maturity? So, I'm going to take a step away for a moment from these sliding scales where we talk about maturity. I'll get back to that. But I just want to talk about what is process maturity and why is it important. And to answer the question, why is it important, I like to sum up this slide by just kind of saying that processes are hard, y'all, Few organizations get it right, the first time out of the gate. Either you get your processes are too simple, and so they're not really driving the performance that you want, or they're too complex. Maybe you have processes that are just way too bureaucratic, and they're really preventing your organization from moving as quickly as we all need to move in this day and age. Also, it's really very rare that organizations have all of the pieces, the people, the processes, the technology, the information, all in place and all in the same state of maturity at the same time. So, it takes time to break down silos within your organization. Some of you might call them fiefdoms, right, where you've got all these different functional units and they're all doing their own thing and they're not working and playing well together, which is what processes really help different functions to do, different departments to do. Maybe you've got good processes, you've gone through the effort of defining your processes, but your technology is obsolete or your technology doesn't really match your processes. Maybe you've got lots of information, but it's really not information that the business cares about or that management cares about, right? So it's hard to get all of those pieces all together at the same time and at the same state of maturity. And that's really what process improvement is all about, what process design and improvement is all about. It also, one of the things you have to look at is not only the maturity of your processes themselves, but the maturity of your organization's ability, and y'all can chat with me. How many of you all out there are still just kind of having the debate in your organizations about what is a process versus what is a procedure, right? It's very, very, and it's okay if you say, yeah, man, that's us. It's very common that organizations have to just go through that process of understanding what a process is, how to design and improve processes, learning the mechanics of designing and improving processes. If anybody had a chance to be in our webinar last month, that's one of the things our speaker talked about is the process for designing and improving processes. So that speaks to that notion of organizational maturity and just learning to do that. So it's
Donna?
important because it's hard and because, yes, ma'am?
Hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Speaking of organizational maturity, I think now would probably be a good time to throw up a couple of those polling questions so we can get a baseline of where our audience is for you.
Okay. Do you want me to do that?
No, I've got you.
Okay. Thank you.
Here we go. You're welcome. Sorry about that. We'll just launch in the first one. And if everybody, usually we wait about a minute to receive answers, but just to expedite this, if everyone can just answer really quickly for us so we can share these with Donna. It's like a dead silence, isn't it? It's actually only been 23 seconds. It feels so much longer. And I guess, Donna, kind of keep going. And I'll close this down in just a minute. Let's just let's be radio show hosts together. We'll just ping pong these a little bit. Okay.
That sounds good. So I talked about the fact that there's these different approaches to assessing process maturity, and I've listed the most common approaches on your screen. And my assumption is that you're attending our webinars because you're interested in IT service management. So a lot of you are probably familiar with CMMI, and you might be familiar with CMMI for services. ISO 15504, which is the international standard for process assessment. The ITIL Process Maturity Framework, which is actually described in the ITIL Service Design publication, and you may or may not be familiar with TIPA, Tutor IT Service Management Process Assessment. TIPA, just as an FYI, kind of takes ISO 15504 and the ITIL Process Maturity Framework and marries them together. So it uses that international standard in order to help you set up a reference model for assessing your ITIL processes.
So Donna, I'm ready to share with you just the first set of results.
Okay.
And we are getting feedback that let's not talk about something so important while the polls are up because it's blocking the view for everyone. Okay. So because you're going through the slides and people are like, we need to see the slide, and I agree. I'm sorry I didn't get these launched sooner.
That's okay.
Process design and improvement efforts. Number one at 36% are handled independently by our process owners. Number two are informal at best. We're just getting started, and that's 24%. Coordinated by our SMO is 23%, driven by benchmarks against standards and best practices is 17%, and interestingly, no one said other, which is a rare event in itself. So I'm going to hide this poll and just throw this second one up.
Okay.
So let me ask you this, Donna. In your experience, what do you think the answer to this next polling question is going to be? Of the following, which processes do you have in place to support process design and improvement? Problem, service level, knowledge, 7-step, other. What do you think is going to be our number one winner?
If I'm guessing, I'm going to say service level management, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But that would be my guess.
You said it, it took first place. Win, place, or show.
See, I don't want to influence anybody's vote. That doesn't make it a right answer.
Murray wants to know, how about none? I think that's a very fair point. And I will say that Charles says bits of them, none quite mature. Greg says none. We're actually getting quite a few nones here.
Now,
Rose says questioning some aspects of each.
Lisa, let me mention to the audience, the 7-step improvement process, if you're not familiar with it, is an ITIL process, but it very much mirrors the DMAIC activities of Six Sigma. So if you're a Six Sigma shop and you're doing well with Six Sigma, but you're not really familiar with 7-step, you can give yourself that one.
And I am ready to, it's a very good point. You know, I always giggle when you say DMAIC. I am going to close this up and share the results with everyone. And I will tell you from the chat, we got a lot of none. And yes, Art, you are going to get a copy of the slides. I'll put the link was in the earlier chat, but I'll resend it out to everyone so you can just link to it. So in first place was your prediction, oh guru, you are correct, service level management at 32%. Coming in next is other, chat your answer, and most of those chats, although not all, were none. Then we've got 19% 7-step, which is a higher number than I thought we were going to say. 14 is problem, and 7% is knowledge.
But some of that 19% might have come in when I said Six Sigma, because if you've got Six Sigma, I'll give that to you. So.
And then just the final polling question is, the biggest ITSM related challenge we face is, chat your answer, senior management support, process design, process conformance, metrics, or other. Once again, please chat in. Oh, here's a good one from someone I know works for a government consulting company. Other, our process folks are developing a tailored maturity model of objectives related to CSS and KPI measures. This technique is driven by a customer who barely accepts discipline.
If I'm understanding, is that like do as I say but not as I do? Is
exactly.
That what I mean?
We're going to put all this stuff in place and we won't follow it. And we're getting a lot of interesting others. SACM, no one wants it. Resource constraints, trying to do ITSM while you're doing everything else. Very, very good point, Greg. Very good point. Resource management and process owner vision from Claudia. Compliance and government challenges. Hard balance between doing it and improving it. I love that, Charles. I think I'll be borrowing that from you. Culture punishes non-compliance, so with no process, there's no out of compliance. John, I've got a book for you to read. All right, so let me close these down and share these results. So, and just so you guys know, this is the flaw with this tool is Donna can't actually see these, which is why we read them back out to her. The biggest ITSM related challenge is number one, 41% process conformance. Coming in second is senior management support at 27%. And I will tell you, we did a webinar similar to this in about 2009, and senior management support was over 50% as the biggest problem. So that's good news to see that declining. Absolutely. Right. Process design metrics and other are basically all the same at 10 and 11%, and really lots of interesting chats on the other. So we'll try to, as you guys know, we do the Q&A report at the end. We'll try to sort of compile some of these other things and put them in the report as well, because there's some really interesting points. All right, Donna, I now turn it back to you officially, and thank you. Go ahead and teach me something now.
Thank you. Okay, so I didn't change the screen, first of all, while the polls were up. So if you were not seeing something, I talked about CMMI 15504, the ITIL Process Maturity Framework, and TIPA. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, I just want to speak to the notion of what process maturity is. So it is, kind of simply put, how well your process is defined. So I'm talking about, how clearly defined the purpose of the process is, how clearly defined your objectives are, right? How clearly defined are the work products that you need to produce from that process. How capable it is of being continually improved through the use of measures, and more specifically measures tied to business goals. So again, that kind of speaks to not just that, yeah, you're producing tons of metrics, but are you capturing the data that you need to and producing the information that you need to in order to let the business know that you understand what's important to them, and that, this process has been designed and is being tailored to meet the goals of the business. And then also maturity speaks to how well the process is embedded in your organization's culture. And I think the fact that 41%, I think, of you talked about process conformance being an issue really speaks to that notion of culture, that, yeah, you can design your processes and you can have these great process definition documents, but at the end of the day, are people following those processes? Have those processes become so well embedded in your organization's culture that they become the way you do things? And I always love when I talk to organizations and they say, we don't talk about ITIL anymore. And what very often they mean is not that ITIL isn't important to them, but that they don't have to talk about ITIL in the context of ITIL anymore. They talk about their processes, and they talk about the way they do business within that organization, the way they do the business of IT service management within that business. So again, it's become the way we do things around here, as opposed to us having to spend time talking about ITIL. You've kind of moved beyond that. Again, not to say ITIL is not important. You just embedded those processes into your organization. So again, you may see in all of these approaches to assessing processes, you're generally going to see this range that goes from 0 to 5 in terms of maturity. 0 or 1 is typically an ad hoc kind of state where everybody's kind of doing their own thing. You don't really have any defined processes. You may have a bunch of procedures strung together, but you don't have really what we would call processes. Repeatable, you've started to recognize, all right, this is something where we need to get better. We need to start to be more predictable in our approach to handling this set of activities. We've got to clarify the objectives. We've got to put some targets in place. Here's where service level management starts to become very, very important, because when you're doing service level management right, service level management gives every other process its targets. A lot of times in organizations, when we think of service level management, we think of just availability management, or we think about, what hours does the service desk have to be available. Service level management gives every other process its targets, and every process reports back its achievements to service level management. So it's a really critical process. Defined or level 3 maturity, we've got a documented process in place. We've agreed on our objectives and our targets. For a lot of you, if you can get your process to what's typically referred to as level 3 maturity, you're probably doing pretty good. You've probably made a good culture change, a good culture shift within your organization. You're not completely flying by the seat of your pants anymore. And, you know, for some of your organizations, that may be where you live. For a while. Not every process, and the whole point of talking about maturity, and one of the things I want to focus on, is that the expectation is not that you're someday going to get every single process to this highest level, level 5 maturity. It will cost you a fortune to try to do that. So one of the things we'll talk about more as we go along is understanding when your processes are good enough given the needs of your organization, given the goals of your organization. Or maybe when you've got some processes that are good enough and you need to turn your attention to some other process that's a little bit immature and that needs to kind of rise up and meet your other processes. So this level 4 managed, and here's the big litmus test for level 4, is that you've got well-defined not only processes, but you've got well-defined process interfaces in place. And process interfaces are really that litmus test between level 3 and level 4. I'll give you an example. Whenever somebody tells me, our incident management process is level 4, or our incident management process is level 5, the first thing I say to them is, that's awesome. Tell me about your problem management process. And if they say to me, well, we really don't have problem management in place yet, then my answer is, then you really don't have a level 4 or a level 5 incident management process, because again, those interfaces is that litmus test. Your incident management process will never be as good as it can possibly be until you get a process like problem management in place, or until you get change management in place that's going to enable you to start predicting incidents. Those processes really enable your incident management process to function more efficiently. They enable your process to be more proactive, right? So that's the litmus test. And then at this level 5, notice the tense here. It is optimizing, which kind of speaks to the fact that you're never done. It's institutionalized. You've made that culture shift. And most importantly, everything that you do is aligned with the needs of your business and the goals of your organization. So an example I always like to use is, you know, change management is one of those processes. It's notoriously bureaucratic in organizations. You know, it's one of those processes, and I always tell people, if your processes are bureaucratic, it's because you made it that way. Because really, ITIL gives you all kinds of guidance on how to make your processes scalable. So if you have, you know, this really somewhat cumbersome and bureaucratic change management process, and what your business is saying is, we need to be more agile, and we need to focus in on moving more quickly and time to market and those types of characteristics, you're clearly out of sync with the goals of your organization. So it would be time for you to kind of take a step back and look at that process and see, what can we do to make that process more agile? What can we do to make that process more scalable, right? So I don't want to spend much more time talking about assessing maturity in these different scales. We will, I promise you, some other day, we will spend a whole entire webinar talking about nothing but that, how to do an assessment. But I want to talk about why you do an assessment. And I want to distinguish between an assessment and an audit. With an audit, you're really looking at conformance to a set of requirements. So you've perhaps got Sarbanes-Oxley requirements. You've maybe got an ISO standard like ISO 20000, and you need to show compliance to that particular standard. So an audit is compliance with a set of requirements. With an assessment, and in particular a maturity assessment, what you're trying to do is, first of all, baseline your strengths and weaknesses. Take a little snapshot of where you are right now. This is great input for any of you in your organizations that do SWOT exercises: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This is a great opportunity for you to generate input into that SWOT process or vice versa. You want to identify process improvement opportunities and then set priorities relative to those opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more coming up about how you, a little tool that you can use to do that. So very basically, doing an assessment involves putting together a team and making sure that you're including all the stakeholders. And in this particular context, I'm talking about all of the stakeholders for the process or perhaps the set of processes that you're looking at assessing. It's very important that you have all the stakeholders engaged because you want to get their feedback. You want to make sure that you understand their requirements. This is really an opportunity for you to build trust with those stakeholders. You know, the worst thing that you can possibly do is sort of half listen to what your stakeholders are saying and then proceed with designing a process that perhaps meets the needs of the IT organization but doesn't meet the needs of your customer stakeholders, for example. So you really have to be willing to listen and act on the requirements of all your stakeholders. You do a self-assessment questionnaire, and all of the stakeholders do that independently, and this is really important. I can't tell you how often I've been involved in assessments where, you know, one part of the organization says, yeah, we're doing a great job at this process, and another part of the organization says, we're doing a horrible job at this part of the process. It's about perception, right? And that's really what you want to get out of this assessment. If your customers perceive that your processes are bureaucratic or inefficient, then you need to address that, and you need to look at what changes you can make to your processes or perhaps to your policies in order to improve upon that. And you want to make sure that you have a certified process design engineer or a project manager or a facilitator, somebody who is skilled at how to do process design and improvement, somebody who is skilled at making sure that all of the stakeholders have participated. You know, a good facilitator is going to make sure that nobody's kind of hanging out in the corner, not really, you know, speaking their mind. A good facilitator, a good CPD is going to kind of drag out from everybody their perspective so that we can address that perspective going forward. So it's really, this is a good, again, kind of trust building exercise and a good relationship building exercise if you are doing it right. So again, we'll take another day and we'll talk more about the mechanics of doing an assessment. I just wanted to give you a little kind of brief overview of how to do that.
Donna, I just scheduled that for July, nice. Just so you know.
There you go. All right. So hot off their breaking news, right, as they say. Excellent. Good. Because, yeah, that's like a whole nother, that's a whole webinar in and of itself, the mechanics of doing a process assessment. Okay. So the title of my webinar is It's Not About the Number. And I want to preface this by saying that doesn't mean the number isn't important. You know, I'm not saying to you don't do process assessments and don't get, you know, a score and see where you are. You are going to do that. But my point is that you're not going to say, okay, we have our incident management process is level 3 maturity, right on, and end there, right? Because really, that doesn't mean anything. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Is that good? Is that bad? Should it be a 3? Should it be a 4? What are we going to do about that number? How are we going to, what are the steps we need to take to transition from that number to the number that we need for this process to be given our business's requirements? So it's not about the number, but I will tell you what it is about, I promise you, by the end of this webinar. So again, I kind of said before, with process maturity, very often you see these maturity scales of 0 through 5 or 1 through 5, which are very, very high-level views of maturity. And then maybe you've seen process maturity, process assessment questionnaires, which will tend to be very, very detailed, right? Because they're looking at what are the activities or practices that you should be doing within a given process, and they're very, very specific. And what I found when I first started writing the ITSM process design guide is there wasn't really any middle ground. There wasn't really anything that just spoke to what is maturity? What does that mean? What are the characteristics of a mature process? And that's really the message that I want to deliver today and that I want to speak to today. So you can see on your slide the factors that influence maturity. And one of the first things is just objective attainment. And one of the questions you always have to ask is, are your objectives clear? You know, is it understood what a given process is supposed to accomplish, and are those objectives aligned with the goals of your business? So again, I gave the example of change management. You know, if your business needs for you to be very, very agile, you know, do your objectives speak to that agility relative to a given process? Are your processes cost effective? And again, if you have a very, very bureaucratic process, I bet you nickel that process isn't very cost effective. It's very likely that you've got checks in that process, or you've got handoffs in that process. You've got, you know, some monitoring activity going or some control points in that process that may or may not be needed, but are absolutely contributing to how much it's costing you to execute that process within your organization. So when I just learned a new little quote that I love, and that is, perfection is when you can't take anything else away. And what that kind of says is you've got it as lean as it can possibly be. You've got in just enough control. You've got just enough process in order to function efficiently and effectively and for everybody to know what they need to be doing on any given day. But you don't go overboard. You don't have a situation where, and this is always one of the complaints about a framework like ITIL, that it becomes a religion and you stop being pragmatic about it, right? So you've got just enough process to function efficiently and effectively. And also, do you have funding? And not only funding for process design and improvement activities, so do you have the resources? Maybe you need to bring in, even if only temporarily, bring in resources to help educate you on your processes, or mentor and advise and consult with you about your processes. Perhaps even you need funding in order to bring in the tools or improve your tools so that when you are done with your process design and improvement work, your tools match your rules, right? Accountability and process compliance, one of the biggest things you all said you struggle with. Do you have people designated as process owners, process managers? Do you have the mechanisms in place to continually assess your processes, or even if only doing internal audits, doing audits to ensure that you do have that process compliance and you're producing the artifacts that you need to for that process, whether you're trying to show compliance with a standard or not. That procedural compliance, and I'll talk a little bit more about processes and procedures shortly. Lifecycle management really speaks to the fact that you are producing the records that you need to be producing. So are you logging every incident? Are you logging every change? Are you tracking the status of those records as close to real time as possible? So that you really could, you know, I always kind of like to ask this question. If you ran a report right now against, you know, pick a process, availability management, would you get an accurate snapshot of what really is happening in terms of availability? Or would you get a snapshot of what was happening a week ago, right? Because your documentation is out of date, or people haven't gotten around to updating whatever database files they need to update in order for you to truly know real time what's happening in your organization at any given point in time. So lifecycle management speaks to that just ongoing tracking and status reporting type activity. How are you doing with using technology and capturing data and producing information and knowledge, right? So do you have the ability to capture what you need in order to execute those processes efficiently and effectively at any given point in time? Knowledge capture is critical, and it's becoming even more and more important in this day and age. Some of you may in your organizations be facing a situation where you've got lots of baby boomers who are getting ready to retire, or you've got maybe some individuals in your organization, I call them biological CMDBs. And what I mean by that is there are people walking around with all this stuff in their heads. And, you always have to ask the question, what if they won the mega Powerball lottery tomorrow? Here in Florida, I think the lottery right now is $110 million. Chances are they're not going to show up for work the next day if they win the lottery. So are you doing everything as an organization to capture that knowledge and make sure that that knowledge is going to be available going forward as you start to see, again, these boomers retire? Or let's flip the coin. We've got young people in the workforce today that are doing such exciting things. These kids have grown up using, and I call it a kid because I'm over 50, so anybody like under 20 is a kid to me. But the younger people today, they've grown up with technology and they understand. They want to, or they're they tend to use technology in ways I would never think of. And some of what they're doing is really cool and it's really innovative. So are we capturing that knowledge as well? Are we tapping into that innovative spirit of these young folks who are mobile and who are just always kind of tuned in to what's going on with their technology? Here's where we start to talk about interfaces, proactive activities, and predictive activities. Again, the more your processes are interfacing with other processes, the more proactive you're going to be. Your incident management process is never really going to be very proactive until you've got it interfacing with change management so that you can start to really understand, or with your problem management process, right? So that you can be prepared if there's an incident. You've got workaround information available. You've got known error information available. Or again, with change management, you know that there's a big mama change in your pipeline and it's on its way. And it's very, very likely that you're going to see a spike in your incident volume at the service desk when this change goes into production, despite your best efforts. Sometimes calls to the service desk are just like, hey, what's this new system that I have? Despite the fact that you've sent out 20 emails for the past 3 weeks explaining that the new system was on its way, right? So that's just being able to predict that we're going to be getting those types of questions, and hopefully we can use our knowledge management systems to answer some of those questions. And of course, a big bottom line and kind of most important factor is customer satisfaction. And in this context, I'm talking about the customers of a given process, right? So these are the folks who are the recipients of that process. They're receiving the results and the outputs associated with that process. And this goes back to that notion of, are you engaging all of your stakeholders and making sure that you're getting their requirements and you understand their requirements? So generally speaking, those are the factors that influence maturity. Now I want to talk relatively quickly about the characteristics of each level of maturity and some of the challenges and transition steps that you may face or need to face along the way. So at level 1, again, this is typically very ad hoc. Typically, you've not really clearly defined what people need to do. You haven't clearly defined people's roles and responsibilities. And as a result, very often you have a lot of micromanaging going on because management has to tell people what to do. Your processes aren't telling people what to do. Your technology hasn't been automated so that your workflow can tell people what to do. So you've got a lot of micromanaging going on at any given point along the way. And chances are you're not doing a good job of capturing data because people don't have time to capture data, right? Again, you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants and everybody's just trying to survive. At this stage of maturity, a lot of times it's really difficult because it is such a chaotic environment to get the management commitment and the staff commitment you need just to spend time talking about processes and putting processes in place. And even if you swear that you're going to do your best to make sure your processes are agile as possible, just the word process is going to be perceived as bureaucratic when you're at this level of maturity. People are really going to push back. They're going to resist. You also probably at this level of maturity don't have a real good understanding of business needs because you don't have the service strategy processes, or maybe you don't have even the service design processes like service level management in place that really enable you to clearly understand what those business needs are. Very often organizations, their first iteration of service level management is the IT organization putting in place SLAs, and those SLAs include targets that were pretty much pulled out of the air. They didn't come through what ITIL views as best practice, which is getting customers' requirements, negotiating and agreeing that you can, in fact, satisfy those requirements, the business agreeing that they're going to put the funding in place that's needed to satisfy those requirements. So if the business is saying they want 100% availability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're willing to fund that, and they understand that they have to fund that if they say that's their requirement. So that's a very different process than, again, what is common practice, which is we're gonna stand up SLAs, and you know, we're maybe not necessarily sure where those SLA targets came from on any given day. So with level 1 maturity, in order to transition from level 1 to level 2, first of all, you just have to get management on board that this is important, that we do need, in fact, to put resources in place, and we need to help people understand how to define and design processes. And I want to take one quick moment here and distinguish between defining a process and designing a process, because it is a very important distinction. With defining a process, visualize a box, right? Just visualize a blank box on a piece of paper. With defining a process, you're saying that, all right, we're going to talk about the business relationship management process. And we want to make sure we're clear on what the triggers are for that process, what the starting point is for that process, what the stopping point is for that particular process. Maybe you start to define some high-level policies associated with that process. In other words, you're defining what the boundaries of this process are. And why you do that and why it's important is because you then have to go forth and identify all the stakeholders associated with those processes. So start out just by defining those boundaries, get all of your stakeholders engaged, and then designing a process is where you're going to start to kind of draw in what's going to happen inside that box, right? How are we going to organize the activities that occur within that box? You also, at level 1 maturity, have to start talking about organizational change management and getting serious about our organizational change management. Now, it has 3 primary characteristics. One is preparing people for the changes to come. The second is equipping them by providing them education, by providing them training. And the third, and really important, is motivating them, getting people excited about process design and improvement, and helping them understand that some of the challenges and some of the pain points that they're feeling today, and chances are if you've got processes at level 1 maturity, people are feeling pain, right? Because you've just got a lot of ad hoc activity going on. Helping people understand that, you know, our goal is to first and foremost alleviate those pain points. So at this stage of the maturity, it's important to understand that what you should not be doing is going out and buying technology and letting your technology define your processes for you or design your processes for you. So if a vendor is telling you, hey, buy our tool and you'll get the processes with it, they kind of don't get it. And if you're kind of saying, oh, goody, you kind of don't get it. With all due respect to everybody out there, the tools come before the rules, so you have to do your process work before you go out and start looking at technology. You could end up with the greatest technology in the world, but it may not meet the needs of your organization because it won't support your processes. It's not a good time to implement SLAs because, again, the service level management as a process is not SLAs, right? The SLAs will come later. It's also not a good time to reorganize. In a lot of organizations, they go through this. We're going to do a reorganization in advance of implementing these processes. Well, as a part of process design and improvement, you may find a different organizational structure that would better meet your needs. So not a good time to reorganize. Is a good time to communicate, communicate, communicate. Anybody who's ever had me speak in a webinar before, I always say, when you think you're communicating enough, double your efforts. You can never communicate enough. So at level 2, you're starting to put resources to these activities. You're starting to document your processes. You're starting to be able to distinguish between processes and procedures. And I want to kind of clarify this. Policies, and I'm speaking to the red text down at the bottom, are really intent, yes? And more specifically, senior management's intent relative to a particular process. Simply put, a process decides what to do, and procedures decide how to do it. One of the questions I am most frequently asked is, can we have multiple change management processes, or should we have multiple release and deployment management processes? And the answer always is no. Process is singular. You should have one change management process. You should be able to agree organizationally on what are the key activities within a change management process and what are the metrics that we need to be producing, right? We should be able to agree on the what. And if you can't agree on the what, you're diving down into too much detail. Take it up a level and get to the point where you can agree on what. And know that procedurally, if people are doing things different in different parts of the organization, that's okay. One of the principles of Agile is that you empower people and you enable them to decide how to do things procedurally, but you have to give them that, at the process level, that understanding of what the results are that they need to be producing, what the objectives are, what the results are, how we're going to measure whether or not they're successful. And then at a procedural level, it's okay, right, if procedurally different parts of the organization are doing things. So at this level, you have to have those kinds of conversations. And at this level, you're kind of just sitting there, all right, where are we going to start? Who needs to be involved? Where are we going to find the time to do all this, right? All of those types of questions are really critical at this stage of the game. It's also really important at this stage to understand you can't be all things to all people. So you do have to really look at being pragmatic in your approach to process design and improvement. So transition steps start with requirements. Make sure that you are looking at and taking guidance from a best practice framework. If you look at ITIL, ITIL has done all the work for you in terms of defining your processes. In ITIL 2011, for every single process, the objectives, the activities, the critical success factors, the roles, the responsibilities, all that information is defined for you. And if you are saying that we're going to adopt best practice, mean it. Take ITIL, right? Take those objectives and use those as your starting point. Now again, how you procedurally do things within that box might vary a bit from best practice. But things like your triggers, your inputs, your outputs, it's all been defined for you. If you're spending a lot of time and effort defining that type of information, don't do that, right? Go to ITIL, and unless you have major angst over how ITIL describes the purpose of a process or its inputs and outputs, just use what ITIL gives you and spend your time and energy talking about and making this design part work, this procedural part work. Benchmarking yourself against perhaps a standard like ISO 20000 or a framework like COBIT, right? The more you draw upon existing frameworks and standards, the easier this is going to be for you. Start with your as-is process. Always take the time to do that. And I want to say this, and I hope you will all write this down if you write nothing else down. One of the things I always encourage organizations to do is to honor the past. You're doing a lot of these processes today already. You might be doing them in an ad hoc way. They might need to be improved, but you're doing, you know, if you're an IT organization, you're managing incidents, you're managing changes, you're doing some things right. So always honor the past and always honor the fact that work has come before, that, you know, somebody's put time and effort into trying to figure out how to do these things, and you want to honor that. You know, if you start to say, oh, we've got to start completely over, you're possibly alienating somebody out there that kind of has a sense of ownership about your existing processes. So you always want to honor the existing processes and speak to the fact that also, let's quote Dr. Deming, we can always do it better, right? Plan, do, check, act. We can always do it better. At this stage of maturity, we also want to be stepping up and really making sure that we've got those organizational change management activities. We're constantly communicating what we're doing, and also that we're baselining any performance metrics that we possibly can. Here is the really critical thing. In order to show an ROI on your process improvement activities, you have to have what your starting point was. So baseline something, anything, so that somewhere down the line you can show that we've been able to increase the efficiency of this process or reduce the number of or increase the number of, right, whatever is the goal associated with that particular process. So, sorry, my computer wasn't playing nicely with me there. One of the tools I mentioned, I'll give you a little tool that you can use. One of the tools you can use is a process improvement matrix. And simply put, what this matrix does is let you identify what your pain points are. And I've just given you some examples here. Customer dissatisfaction, employee dissatisfaction, maybe we need to reduce costs, right? You understand my point. These are your pain points. And then given those improvement opportunities, let's look at all of our existing processes, or perhaps look at processes we don't have yet in place, but we know that those processes will help us in those areas, and then score them out, right? And determine and do a little evaluation of what processes will best help us, will give us the greatest opportunity to improve in this particular area, and score it out. And anybody who's been ever looking for kind of a logical way to come up with your roadmap, where should we start first? What process should we do first? Where should we allocate our resources? This process improvement matrix is a nifty little tool that will help you do that. And we actually do this, we very often do this matrix in a little workshop called Building Blocks. I think Chantel will talk to you about it in a minute. And so this can be a really little short exercise, but it is a really quick and efficient way to give you that starting point. So with our level 3 maturity, we now have a process, right? We've recognized a process, we've got a designated process owner, we've documented it, we're measuring our performance. At this stage of the maturity, you're starting to see good things happen. You're starting to see the benefits. Things are less chaotic, right? You know, you're starting to be able to give management some information that they need in order to, first of all, just get behind these processes and these improvement initiatives and gain their ongoing support. But one of the challenges you do have to resist is getting stuck at this stage of maturity and thinking you're done. The kiss of death is thinking a process is done. And also, you want to avoid process silos, because remember I said a litmus test between 3 and 4 is how your processes interface. It's very common for organizations to get kind of stuck here, so you have a really good incident management process, but it's not talking to anybody else. Or worse, even worse, you have a really good SACM process, Service Asset and Configuration Management process, but it's not talking to any other process. You know, and I'm sure some of you are going through this. So why have Service Asset and Configuration Management if it's not going to enable every other process to function more efficiently and effectively? That's why you do it. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of data, right? And it's really just costing you money at that point. So you have to now start looking outside your process. Up until now, we've been focused internally on our process. Now we have to look at how well is this process aligned with our business plans? Is it, you know, if we have multiple parts of the organization executing a process, are they doing it consistently in those two organizations? how's the integration? How's the integration with our supplier processes? A lot of you are probably struggling with cloud-based computing right now. Cloud-based computing does absolutely change the way organizations do business, and it really requires that you get really serious about things like change management, right? So it might not even be your change management process. It might be your supplier, your cloud provider, and how are they doing with change management, or how are they doing with release and deployment management? Are they giving you a heads up when they're thinking about putting in place a new release that's now going to affect your entire a customer community within your organization? So those are the types of things that we have to think about with level 3 maturity, because now we have to start to, again, turn outside of our organization. We have to start to look at our functions. The service desk, for example, a lot of times we think of them as being very involved in incident management. Well, if the service desk isn't designed in service design activities, if they're not involved in service level management, in putting in place your availability, your capacity management processes, those processes are never going to be as effective. Same thing with your technical and application management teams. If they're not involved earlier in the life cycle in the design and improvement of your processes are never going to be effective as they possibly can be. You also have to make sure that you look at your reporting. And somebody kind of said compliance is, I forget what the quote was, but it made me think, ooh, negativity going on. You've got to have a positive tone with reporting and always be looking at where are those opportunities for improvement, and again, where can we start to align our processes and our tools. So with level 4, it's about the interfaces, and it's about making sure that we have business-focused metrics in place. It's about listening to our customers and really getting serious about taking action on complaints and understanding that it's hard. You know, there's very much a temptation to think we're done, but we've got to focus on process improvement and view it as real work and understand that we've got to do ongoing communication and education and training. It's awesome if you kind of took everybody in your organization through maybe some ITIL awareness or some ITIL foundation training, but are your process owners and process managers going on to advanced training? What about the new people who come into your organization? Are they getting the education and training that everybody else did? So here's where we need to start thinking about a service management system and looking at that mechanism for ongoing improvement, capturing continual improvement opportunities, making sure that we're constantly looking at and kind of taking a team approach to process design and improvement. Here's where maybe for some of you, you start to look at a service management office, because your service management office can then be looking at what, again, doing that prioritization exercise and looking at improving and integrating your processes as a program, as opposed to having process owners or process managers who are independently doing good work, but maybe not doing work that's going to benefit your greater integrated set of processes. So here's where you are looking at the maturity of your organization overall, not just the maturity of your process, of your individual processes. And that's, again, you know, what our service management office is all about. So again, just that ongoing commitment to providing that education and that training and really listening to feedback. Level 5, very few organizations get there. It costs a fortune, first of all, to sustain this level of maturity. And even if you get there, you need to understand that if you don't continue to devote resources at this level of maturity, it's very likely that you're fairly quickly going to slip back to 4 or perhaps even slip back to 3. You have to, in order to sustain level 5 maturity with processes, fully affect culture change within your organization. It has to truly be the way we do things around here. And Cotter actually once said, the way you know your process or your culture change is successful is people to start to defend the processes. You know, if you have people who are not complying or trying to step outside of processes, someone else, one of their peers, will say, hey, that's not the way we do things around here, right? People will start defending those processes. So at level 5, continual improvement is a way of life. So what are some lessons learned with process design and improvement? First of all, senior management commitment is essential. That's not to say you can't have some really good and successful grassroots efforts with process design and improvement, but at some point in time, you need some money, right? You need some funding, and at some time you also need senior management, again, to put those policies in place, because policies really speak to senior management's intent. You want to and make sure you designate and educate your process owners. Make sure that they understand not only their process, but how to design and improve that process, perhaps through something like CPDE. Adopt and mean it, a framework like ITIL or a framework like COVID or ISO 20000 standard, and then adapt it, right, to the needs of your organization. Treat all of this activity like a project. Have a program in place for how all of your process work comes together to make sure that you're addressing those process interfaces along the way. And again, make sure that you're managing that organizational change.
Donna?
Yes.
Hi, Donna. Just excuse me for just 1 minute. It's noontime, and I know some of our listeners need to get off of the webinar at this point. So I just wanted to remind everybody that our February webinar is going to be on Thursday, February 21st, and Jane Grohl is doing the presentation on problem management, If I Knew Then What I Know Now, and it's a retrospective on common implementation challenges and ideas for correcting them. So I just wanted to, I know you're wrapping up, but I just wanted to let people know that because people are need to get off of some of the webinars, okay?
Okay, and I'm sorry for anybody that has to leave. So yeah, a lot of these points I've made along the way, so I'm not going to repeat. Making sure that you are baselining what you're doing so that you can continually along the way show that ROI, have short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. Make sure that, and this is always an important point, that when you're defining roles and responsibilities, you circle around and look at, do we need to change people's job descriptions? Do we need to change people's performance programs so that they understand the importance of complying with these processes? It's part of their performance program. And also reward compliance. Many times in IT, we reward the heroes. We reward the people who save the day, right? Something bad happens and they sweep in and save the day. Well, we also know that many times those heroes cause whatever happened to begin with because they're maybe cowboys and they're a little bit operating outside the law. So don't reward people for saving the day when they possibly caused whatever the crisis is that they had to save us from. Reward compliance, reward the people and acknowledge the people who are following the processes, not the people who are, right, saving the day. Also, make sure you reward the people who are following the process even when it's difficult and making recommendations on how to improve the process. I always tell people, if your processes aren't working, the answer isn't don't follow the process. The answer is fix the process, right? So reward the people who are complaining and reward and acknowledge the people who are saying, hey, this is painful. You've got to find a better way to do this. Really listen to those complaints and act on those complaints, and also be willing to innovate. Be willing to take calculated risks. If you've got a process that's very bureaucratic, you really have to look at, do we need all these controls? Do we need all of these handouts? Maybe strip it down to the minimum critical activities for that process. Here's where ISO 20000 really comes into play. What ISO 20000, the international standard for IT service management, gives you is the minimum critical activities associated with processes. So strip it down and take some calculated risk. I'm not saying take risks that aren't going to endanger your organization, but maybe be willing to have a little bit more agile process and then monitor it. And, you know, if you find that things start to get a little out of control, then slowly reintroduce controls. But sometimes we swing from completely ad hoc to completely bureaucratic, and what we need to really land on is something in the middle. So be pragmatic about it, right? Have just enough process in order for you to function efficiently and effectively. And that's really where I'll end it. I said I would tell you what, in my opinion, it is about. It's not about the number. It's about having just enough process. It's about having a process that's delivering the value that's required by your customers, but at an acceptable cost. That's where you really achieve true efficiency for your organization. Have just enough process to meet the goals of your business. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Chantel.
Hey, Donna, it's Karen. Actually, I'm going to take it for a minute.
Okay.
And while and thank you. That was a great presentation. We've got lots of feedback for you. And while we regroup the Q&A, I'd like to introduce Chantel Smith. And Chantel is our Senior Practice Manager to tell you a little bit about our Certified Process Design Engineer course and a special offer that we're running for this month's webinar attendees. Hello, Chantel. Chantel?
Hello, Karen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm good. I'm good. And Donna, what a great job. I'm very much looking forward to the July webinar now because I would really like to hear more about assessments. I think that's great. I've been asked to introduce you to an exclusive promotion that we are offering for our January webinar attendees. For those of you who might be interested in learning more or becoming a certified process design engineer yourself, we are offering a special value on our upcoming February 4th through 8th class in our Dallas training facility. For our webinar attendees, we are offering a BOGO. You know, pay for one learner and get a second learner at no charge. You simply go to our website at www.itsmacademy.com and sign up for the class. Enter the promo code WebCPDE, and you will get a message stating that we will email you shortly for the second learner name. Again, that code is WebCPDE. This 5-day certification course teaches how to re-engineer or engineer quality-lasting ITSM processes. Class provides hands-on opportunities to analyze, design, measure, and integrate service management processes. If you are interested in learning more or becoming a certified process design engineer, we would love to see you in Dallas. Again, that web code is WebCPDE. Donna also mentioned that we do have a hands-on workshop called the Building Blocks of IT Service Management Process Design. This 4-hour workshop can be delivered on-site to your team. If you are interested in learning more about that workshop, could you just shoot an email out to info@itsmacademy.com and we'll get back with you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Donna, and back to you.
Thank you, Chantel.
Thank you, Chantel. Well, we do have a lot of questions for you, Donna.
Okay.
And a lot of feedback. You know, I've got a lot of, Glenn says, excellent job as usual, Donna. Thank you so much. You know, Ben is saying thank you. Rose is saying excellent job. Another awesome session. So you've got a lot of kudos, and it was a great session.
Thanks,
so
everybody.
You ready for some? Yeah. So
yep, bring it on. I'm ready.
I think you're getting them all jazzed up here, Donna.
This is always the scary part for me, but I'm ready.
Okay. Tom is asking, do people not conform due to a lack of management support?
Wow, that's a great question. Certainly people don't conform due to a lack of management willingness to require compliance, and maybe I'm just restating what you're trying to say. So if that's what you were trying to say, I absolutely would agree with you on that. Again, I think sometimes management has a tendency to reward the heroes or reward the people who are getting it done. And I always say get her done with quality, right? I believe get her done, but you can't get her done by breaking the rules. And so, yeah, management has to be, and here's where senior management commitment has to set the tone in terms of the policies that they put in place, but then management, line management, must require that people follow the process and comply with the process. And again, if the process isn't working, then work with a process owner to fix the process, as opposed to just not following it. And so that's part two that I would say. Sometimes people don't follow a process just because it is a bad process and nobody's listening. Maybe they've been complaining, or maybe they've made suggestions on, and they've described the pain that they're experiencing as a result of this process, but the process owner isn't doing anything about it. So it's really the process owner's responsibility to get out there and listen and understand, why aren't people complying and what can I do? And if sometimes the answer is there's nothing I can do, maybe whatever this step is, or whatever this document or record is that has to be produced is required for compliance purposes, then that's where management has to step in and say, look, this is part of your job, it's part of your job description to create this record, and I'm going to be measuring you on whether or not you create that record. Management sometimes has to give a little tough love there. So that's the two reasons I would say. Nobody's listening, and taking action and to alleviate pain points, and management may be not willing to give that tough love. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yes, it did. Thank you, Donna, for that. Rick is asking, should not the process maturity assessment include people, technology, and measurements, metrics, reports, as well as organizational structure?
Yes. Yeah. People, process, technology, the information that you're capturing, and your culture. And you might not do a very comprehensive assessment like that. If you look in the ITSM Continual Service Improvement book, as a matter of fact, they talk about 3 different types of assessments. One is what I just talked about, the Big Mama assessment, which includes looking at your culture. Sometimes you might just look at your process only. So there are different flavors of assessments. But yes, if you are kind of just getting started, you absolutely want to do quite a comprehensive assessment so that you can really understand what the culture of your organization is, because organizational maturity is a part of it. Organizational maturity and process maturity. Thank you,
Donna. Thank you. Now, Murray is saying, I wonder how many others see a lack of proactive activities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, what was problem management? Problem management was 14% of you said that you've got problem management in place. So I think there's the answer to that question. Because problem management is really, as a process, is one of the most valuable processes in terms of helping you to be more proactive. I mean, problem management, little textbook problem management has 2 aspects. Reactive problem management, why are these incidents happening and what can we do to prevent them? But proactive problem management is really looking at, all right, conceivably, what changes do we have going on in our organization, and what can we do to prevent incidents from happening to begin with? And remember, too, that problem management doesn't just look at incidents and why are there technical failures. If you've got a process that's malfunctioning, problem management can look at why that process is malfunctioning. Problem management can look at why people aren't complying with your processes, right? Problem management is a methodical way of figuring out what the root cause of something is. So the fact that I agree with that there's not more proactive activity, and I really think this is where we have to, as an industry, kind of, in some organizations, it's almost like we're still back in ITIL version 2, where the focus is on incident management and change management and service asset and configuration management, which are important processes. I'm not saying they aren't important, but at some point you have to start looking at the earlier parts of the life cycle. You have to start looking at service strategy. You have to start looking at service design. If you truly want to ensure that everything you're doing is aligned with the needs of your business, you have to be talking about service strategy. You have to be talking about processes like business relationship management and service portfolio management, right? Those earlier in the life cycle processes, which are also more proactive, right? That they enable you to be more proactive. Look at processes like availability and capacity management. The proactive side of availability management happens in service design, where you've got a service that's on the drawing board and you're talking about what are the requirements for that service. And then you've got the reactive side of it, which is once it's in production, reporting on the 99.999% availability. So I think that need to be proactive just, again, speaks to the fact that we've got to learn to look at those earlier in the life cycle processes. And I'll say one more thing about this. I want to reiterate that you may be on this quest to get to a level 5 maturity incident management process as an example, and maybe hopefully this webinar will kind of get you to take a step back and say, you know what? We've got an awesome incident management process. Maybe it's sitting at level 3, maybe it's even sitting at level 4 where we've got some good interfaces in place, and that's good enough, right? It's very cost effective for our organization. So let's not allocate any more resource for now to serious process and design and improvement with incident management. You still want PDCA going on, Plan, Do, Check, Act, right, to make sure you don't slip back. But let's take those resources and let's spend them on a process earlier in the life cycle. So I hope one of the messages you all took away was that some of your processes may be good enough, right, to keep the trains running on time, as I like to say, and let's start to focus on more proactive activities. That was a really long answer, wasn't it? I'm sorry. But I hope it helped.
But that was a great answer, though, Donna. There was a lot in that answer, so that was great. Ben had a comment when we were talking about, when you were speaking to the factors that influence maturity, and he just wanted to add the capabilities of your people. What he said was, what do they know how to do? What do they feel comfortable doing? What will they do on their own versus what will they do that they have to be forced to do?
Yeah, awesome point.
So he just wanted to add that. So thank you for that, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome point.
And Rose wanted to share. She likes the statement: "Perfection is when you can't take anything else away."
Yeah, isn't that awesome?
She said Henry Ford's motto was simplify, 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 and when you're done, simplify.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I became a certified Scrum Master a couple of weeks ago, and it was awesome because, first of all, I'm a lifelong learner, and I always just love learning something new, but I was really excited by how much I could apply and I'm not a developer, I will never be a developer, but I really was able to apply a lot of what I learned in that Scrum class and what I learned about the Agile Manifesto to what I'm doing day in and day out. And it was actually, I have to give props to my Scrum Master professor who gave me that "perfection is when you can't take anything else away" quote, but it's like one of those where I couldn't write it down fast enough. I was like, wait, stop talking while I can write this, so I can write this down and don't forget it. Okay. But if you look at the Agile Manifesto, one of the things it says is we value people over processes, and as a process geek, that freaked me out when I first saw that. I was like, what are you talking about? And what he taught me is this notion of just enough process for your people to be efficient and effective, right? Just enough process for you to achieve the goals and objectives of that process. And when I heard that, I was like, that got me excited. So there's a little Agile 101 for you.
Thank you.
That could be a whole other webinar too. So
exactly, right?
Hey, what you doing in October? No, I'm kidding.
And Rick had a comment for you, Donna. He said there is a difference between data, information, and knowledge.
Yes. So data are facts, right? It's just raw facts. We have an incident. Information is when you start to put those facts in context. We have an incident with a server that has on it a mission-critical application, right? So now there's some context there. It's like, oh, okay. That enables us, and now knowledge is we know that if it's a mission-critical application, that's bad, right? And we're going to handle this as a major incident and kind of get all hands on deck to start working on that incident. So if you Google the DIKW hierarchy, it's called, you'll just find, all kinds of information out there about, data versus information versus knowledge, and then ultimately wisdom. And wisdom is really the human aspect of things, which is just we understand, right? We understand what's important.
Okay, thank you.
I always use the analogy of little kids, right? At some point in time, a little kid has to learn that when a stove is on, you don't put your hand on it. And now as adults, we just know that. That's wisdom. So.
Oh, well, thank you for that clarification, Donna. I'm hoping that you have some words of wisdom for Eric. Eric said, wow, 2 strikes, reorg and bot technology.
Well, first of all, not words of wisdom, but I'll say welcome to the welcome to the club. You're in good, very, very good company. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are saying this, going, yeah, we did those things too. So welcome to the club, first of all. And this is one of those things where it is really important to understand that if you look at IT service management, for example, it's not to say that some point in time you won't reorganize and find that you want to structure your organization in a different way. Maybe you move from having very hierarchical structure to maybe having some self-directed teams, that sort of thing. But to make a change without really understanding, first of all, the culture of your organization, the and the processes that you need to have in place in order for all of those different entities within your organization to work together, because that's what processes do. Processes enable different teams within an organization to work and play well together. And until you design your processes, a reorg isn't going to buy you any benefit, right? You're just going to have different teams with different names that still aren't going to work and play well together, right? So at some point, you're going to have to get serious about designing and improving your processes. Now, once you do that, if you've got well-designed processes, you actually can reorganize and still have your processes function efficiently and effectively, because you have to, here's where RACI comes into play, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. You might have to redo your RACI chart to say, okay, we have these activities within this process. Who's now going to be responsible? Who's going to be accountable? Who's going to be consulted? Who's going to be informed? But that will be a relatively straightforward exercise for you to do that. Whereas, again, until you have your process in place, you can reorganize, till the cows come home, and people still aren't going to work and play well together because you've not made it clear who's supposed to be doing what, and you haven't clarified those responsibilities. And the tool part, here's how I'll say it. If you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster. Right? So hopefully that's kind of a good way to end that answer. I mean, no tools before the rules. You've got to define your processes and then find the tools that are going to enable you to automate those processes and do them even more efficiently and effectively. But if you start to let a tool tell you how to do your business, you're going to be in trouble. You're never going to quite get there. And the better vendors understand that and will be telling you that as well.
So there's
Karen?
hope for Eric. Yep, there's hope for Eric.
But welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. You are in very good company, my friends. Been there, done that, had a cup of coffee, and
Thank you, Donna. I'm sure Eric appreciated that, so thank you for that. Melissa said, excellent information about the difference between maturity levels. Thank you so much for an excellent webinar, as usual.
You're welcome.
And Glennis is asking, would you tell us a little more about applying performance measures which would support compliance with process? What type of KPIs would you suggest, for example, for change management?
Well, what you have to look at is what are, and here's kind of the way I always approach everything. I always go to ISO 20000. I'm a little bit of an ISO 20000 bigot, but what are the minimum critical activities associated with that process? And the beauty of a standard is a standard will tell you what you shall do. So what ISO 20000 would tell you, for example, is that you shall record all changes. So you now know that you need to find, in order to demonstrate compliance with a process, you have to have a record of every single change that's made. So go to a standard, or go to something like COBIT. COBIT's free. COBIT will help you with the controls as well, so that you understand, again, what are those records, what are those documents, what are those minimum critical activities that you need to be producing. And in terms of compliance, what you're looking for is evidence, right? You're looking for the records being produced or the documents being produced. And compliance can also come into play with things like service level management. Remember I said service level management gives every other process its targets, and every process reports back its achievements. So are you in compliance with whatever are the requirements that are specified in your SLAs for that particular process? I hope that helped. So you know, the KPI would be something like, you know, increase the availability of all required records and documents associated with this process, or something like that. I can never do KPIs on the fly off the top of my head, but I will answer that question. I'll give you some more specific KPIs in the post-class Q&A.
Oh,
but
great.
It will have to do with records and documents, I assure you.
Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you, Donna.
And Donna, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second to say that Bill just said, that's so funny because I resisted ISO 20K for so long, and then I found out you have that one-day bridge class, and it gives me all my shoulds and all my shalls and how that changed my world. I thought that was a great comment.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and here's the thing. Here's what I always tell people about ISO 20000. I always say use ISO 20000 as a tiebreaker, because it does give you the shalls. And for those of you who don't know, a shall is like a must. You must do this. It's not optional. So if you have one part of your organization that's saying, you know, we need to record every single change, and another part is saying, that's crazy talk, we can't possibly record every single change, what does ISO 20000 say? And if ISO 20000 says you shall record all changes, then there's your answer. The tie is broken. You do, you know, ISO 20K gives you those minimum critical activities, and it is a succinct list. I mean, people get intimidated sometimes by the ITIL books, and I'm not saying don't read the ITIL books, because there's so much valuable information in them, especially the ITIL 2011 editions. But if you're really looking for kind of the litmus test of what are the minimum critical things that we need to be doing, ISO 20000 gives you that. And there's books, if you know, there's books in available that will give you those shalls. So it's just a really good, succinct source of information about those critical activities. So I'm glad that there's someone out there like me who's now like, yeah, we love ISO 20000.
What a difference a day made for him.
I just had to come off mute to laugh at that, Karen.
It was a day well worth spent.
Yeah.
And Ben is asking, Donna, in an ongoing maturity improvement program, how important is it to start out with goalposts? And he's saying, I mean, these may change over time, but should leadership communicate where the organization wants to be maturity-wise in order to improve the chances that the organization will get there?
Yeah, it's really critical because, and this speaks to that notion of how do you keep the momentum going. I talked about, you know, short, medium, and long-term goals. It's always very tempting with process design and improvement to think you're done. I mean, it's the biggest mistake that organizations make, but you really do need to understand that the minute you think you're done, your process is starting to deteriorate, like right then and there. So having those goals, having that vision of where you're heading, also helps you you explain to people, why are we doing this? And that's a fundamental premise of organizational change management, of why are we doing this? What is the vision? Where is this taking us? And also, here's a big reason. It gives you the opportunity to celebrate successes. And I think that's something that we forget to do a lot of times. I do sometimes see organizations, and I've had people say to me, like, I don't really see how ITIL is benefiting our organization. And I very often, because I'm maybe independent of their organization, can say, well, hold on, let's talk about where you were a year ago, or let's talk about where you were 2 years ago and the types of things that were happening in the organization and the pain you were experiencing as an organization, and now look where you are now. So having those goals gives you the opportunity to celebrate when you achieve those goals. Now the trick is to always then set new goals, right, to raise the bar and continue to improve. But it's like, how do any of you have those blood drives where you've got the blood thing and you fill it up and everybody can kind of see how much everybody's contributed, or a charity drive or something, right? It gives you that kind of visual ability to report on how you're doing. And I want to say one last thing. If you do have some reporting that speaks to where you are relative to your goals, one of the things that is sometimes exciting is if people go up and go, I thought we were doing better than that. And if you do, I can't think of the guy's name right now, but he used to say, great, let's talk about the data. And in other words, if people think they're doing better than the reports are showing, it's a real good opportunity for you to have a conversation about what data are they capturing, and are they maintaining the records real time, and do people really understand that the data they input into all your systems on a day-to-day basis at the end of the day result in those reports that are hanging on the wall that management is looking at. So again, if the reports don't accurately show what people think they should be showing, let's talk about the data, and let's talk about the information we're producing, and let's fix that. It's a great opportunity to help people understand why capturing data real time and capturing accurate data is so important. So it's critical. It's critical. Goalposts are critical.
Right.
But don't have them be like meaningless, things on the wall that nobody really looks at. They have to be, you want to make sure that they are in fact driving behavior within your organization, and that's where, again, senior management commitment becomes really critical. Okay, I'll stop now.
No, thank you, Donna. It's like 12:32. We've still got more than 80 people still on, Donna. People are very, very interested in this. I know, it's amazing. And I've got 2 more questions that I'm going to pose to you about sustainability. So, and then we'll wrap up the webinar. But John has a question. He's saying design and improve hasn't really been the problem. The problem that they have is sustainability, which leads to continual recapture, redesign, re-improvement. Do you have any tips for him on that?
Well, I guess I would say 2 things. Number one, is your process okay, right? Plan, do, check, act, right? Simply says the check part is, and Deming actually, later in his life, Deming kind of said, I wish I hadn't made it plan, do, check, act. If Michael Cardinal was out there, he could probably, he said, I wish it would have been plan, do, analyze, act, or investigate, act, something like that. Because he said, check made it so the people went, check, okay, good enough, and didn't really look at and try to understand, should we in fact take action, right?
Michael is indeed. Sorry, Donna. Michael is indeed out there, and it's study.
Study. Thank you, Mike. Yes.
Thank you, Mike.
I knew he would know. Plan, do, study, act. Right. So, is it good enough? Right. Or do we in fact need to take action? So that's kind of what I would encourage you to do: is plan, do, study, act. Is it good enough? Because maybe it is good enough. And if so, then you just acknowledge that. You report on that you did in fact go assess this process. It's good and it's meeting the objectives that we need it to meet at this time in the organization. and we'll circle back around to it 6 months from now or a year from now and make sure that it is continuing to meet the organization's needs, because business requirements are changing all the time, and allocate your resources somewhere else. The other thing I have to say is that, oh my God, this is going to take way too long. Understand that at some point in time, if you have truly interfacing processes, your one process is going to start to mess with another process's metrics. So for example, if you have a good problem management process, at some point it's going to affect your incident management process metrics. So for example, if you have a high first contact resolution at the service desk, chances are they're solving like really easy incidents. And if problem management comes in and eliminates some of those recurring incidents, you're actually going to see the first contact resolution of your service desk go down, which some people are going to perceive as a really bad thing. And what you have to do is set expectations within the organization that that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing, because it means problem management is doing its job. But that's easier said than, some of you all are out there nodding your heads right now, I'm sure, because it's easier said than done, because management always has a tendency to see something that used to be going up that is now going down as bad. So here's where the process owners have to get really, really good at understanding what is the downstream effect of interfacing one process with another process, and what's it going to do to those process metrics. And here's where you might need to circle back around to service level management and make sure that your targets are actually still realistic given the maturity of your processes. Because again, the more your processes are interfacing, the more one process is, the more it's going to start to influence your metrics.
That's a good watch out.
I could have talked about that for another 15 minutes, but I won't. But hopefully, whoever asked that question, if that didn't make sense to you, circle back around to me.
What you doing next January?
I actually, Fusion, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, that was actually my topic at Fusion. It was called Understanding the Metrics Lifecycle. It's probably, the deck is probably on our website. If you go to our old webinars, you might actually find where I gave that presentation years ago. Understanding the Metrics Lifecycle, it would be called. We'll put it in the post class if it's still out there on our web. We'll put it on our website even if it's not out there now, and make that presentation available to you.
Perfect, perfect. And here's my last question for the day, Donna, and this is from Glenn. And Glenn is saying, do you know of any organizations that have progressed to and have been able to maintain or remain at level 5 maturity? And if so, do these organizations exist in specific industries? And there's actually a little bit more. Let me just kind of read the whole thing for you, and then maybe we'll take it piece by piece. So, and then if it is not considered as confidential, can you name? We won't name, but we could tell areas of where these organizations are if you do know of any of them.
I'm going to answer the question this way. I have never heard of an organization if you look at all of the IT service management processes, right? So ITIL has 26 processes. I've never heard of an organization that has achieved level 5 maturity on all of those processes. And if they have, I assure you it costs them a fortune to do that. I mean, it's very, very costly. The organizations that are the industry that I would say is where you will see the most organizations who have high performing processes are going to be things like managed service providers, so like your cloud providers, and they have to be, right? It's a competitive advantage for their organization. Real dollars are lost every single time they have an outage. You're gonna see it in organizations like the and I can't say I have some inside knowledge, but the Amazons of the world, and those organizations where a home shopping network, right, where millions and millions and millions of dollars are lost every second when their services aren't up and running. You would see very high performing organizations in those types of industries. So anywhere where there's a need for high performance you'll tend to see, much more mature processes. You look at organizations like Amazon.com and those types of companies, you'll see very mature, for example, change management processes because, again, millions of dollars are lost if they have an outage of some kind. And in this day and age with Twitter, it's international news, right? Think about it. Anytime a company these days has some kind of a major outage, or they have a security breach, and so customer profiles are made available, it becomes overnight news through social media. So in those types of organizations, you'll see very, very mature processes.
Donna, I'm going to interrupt just one more time to say that Jean Kim's new book about DevOps and helping the business win is available on Amazon. It's actually the #1 bestseller in the business section right now. And I'm going to send out a link because he has written a phenomenal book that's, for those of you familiar with The Goal by Goldratt, it's similar. It's an homage to that, but it's a fictional story about this poor guy in IT and what's happening in his company that's about to get shut down on him, and how they bring in ITSM process and primarily DevOps to save the company. And it's just a fantastic book. So I'm going to find that link and send it out now, and we'll get that in the Q&A report too. But it's one of the best books I've ever read, and it is the most helpful book I can imagine for an IT practitioner or manager.
Right. Nice. And if you, Jean has done a lot of work with an organization called the IT Process Institute. If you're not familiar with the IT Process Institute, they do a lot of studies, and they look at high-performing organizations. And a lot of times, if you go to their website, you'll see where they'll kind of say, okay, in the highest performing organizations, what processes do you see in place? I don't, they speak to maturity. I don't know that they explicitly say level 5 or level 4, but they do speak to, in order of maturity, what are the most critical processes to have in place in order to, in fact, be a high-performing organization. And Jean speaks to that in his book as well.
We have lots of information going out on this week's with our Q&A this month. A lot of resources for people.
It's a fun topic.
Yes, and thank you so much, Donna. I mean, it's a wealth of information, and there are just so many comments here from everybody that, was just a great presentation, wealth of information for them. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So kudos to you for that, and thank you for delivering the webinar for us this month.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thanks for the great questions. Those were interesting and tough. So it was fun. Thank you.
They were. And I just wanted to remind everybody that our next webinar is Thursday, February 21st, and Jane Grohl is going to present If I Knew Then What I Know Now, Problem Management, a retrospective on common implementation challenges and ideas for correcting them. So we hope you join us then. And I know that most of you have requested pre-registration for the next webinar, and if so, you'll receive a confirmation by email. And for those of you that haven't requested pre-registration, we'll send you an invitation for the next webinar. And as you log out, if you could just please take a minute to complete the post-webinar survey. Your feedback is very important to us, and we are always in our continual improvement mode here as well. So thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Donna.
everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Donna. It was great.
Thank you.